Hi, sir. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir. I will be
Kumusta
backlogging
kayo?
naman po,
Sige lang,
sir.
go ahead. Sige lang. We'll start in a few minutes pa naman. We'll wait for the others. No worries. Uh, we'll just set. Good evening as well, Sabel. Okay, it's 6:02 na. So I think we can start naman. Hopefully the others can follow. There's seven of us. Hopefully we'll have more later. So you guys can see my deck, no? And you can hear me well naman.
Yes, sir.
Sige. Again, good evening to everyone. Thanks for joining again. So this evening we're gonna start module 4. No, I posted it last week. Yun nga, suggested pace is hopefully you've already started it or about to start. You have 4 to 5 weeks to cover this. It's the longest module, no? But you know, if you think it's really too heavy, I tried to, based on the evaluation from the previous semesters and quarters, I tried to reduce the length and made some things optional. No, uh, some people, no, some what do you call this? I- just as a tip, I mean, they do this in law school. No, I did not take up law, of course. No? I don't. I hate memorizing. But you know what they do is sometimes each person doesn't read everything. No, they assign specific chapters or material to other people. That person they assign they do summaries and then they exchange. No, so you can also do that as well. So, but you know, I mean, to the extent that you can, no, because it's not just because it's for Sockside 13, but I hope you find some of the items interesting. Kung bitin pa kayo, if you want more resources, just let me know. No, I have more if you want. So, and module 5 is going to be the shortest. So, I expect that you can finish that actually in a few hours, no, even less than an hour. Okay, so I already included at the end of Module 4 the guidelines, the instructions for the second graded assignment. Now it's a group work, no? Each group you will be assigned the specific policy. So it's the same, it's the same grouping as that of your final integrated output, your NSTP Big KISS groups, basically. So you will be assigned a specific law. You will critique it. No? Actually, it's a law. No? When I was assigning this previously, no, some were not yet enacted into law. No? So now they're all laws. No? So each group will be assigned. I did this randomly. No? So rice tarification law, I just plucked in from the NSTP grouping list. Sige. So you have three things, no? Six things aligned to the topics of Module 4. So for agriculture, you have two laws, no? The rice tarification law, the Agri-Agra Reform Credit Act. By the way, I included the Republic Act number. So make sure that's the recent one. No? Kasi for some, especially the Agri-Agra law and the Magna Carta for MSMEs, no, these have undergone some amendments, no, some changes in law. So please refer to the Republic Act number. So the more recent ones have a higher Republic Act number. Then for fiscal, you have two laws also, the CREATE law as well as the TRAIN law. For population and demography, you have the RH bill for the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012, and then Magna Carta for MSMEs. If you're having difficulty with your groupings, just let me know. But don't complain to me that, sir, yung group ko, ganun. No, hopefully you try to, try to help each other out. No one sana yung parang iwas trabaho. Let's try to, be productive, all of us, all of you. I hate it when students come to me and say, sir, kasi ganito, someone's not helping, etc., etc. In the real world kasi, treat this as practice. No? In the real world, you can't sometimes choose who your group mates will be. And hindi kayo pwede magsumbong sa boss, sir, kasi si is not working. So try as much as you can to, improve or have a good group dynamic. So the instructions are at the end of Module 4. It's a critique of the law. No? When you say critique kasi, it means identifying both positives and negatives, not just negatives. Deadline is weeks away pa naman. So you still have a lot of time. November 22, 2021, same time, no? Right before midnight. So submitted via Canvas. I don't expect everyone to submit it. Or just choose one rep per group to submit on Canvas. Again, format is up to you. Not more than 10 pages, single or double spaced. The usual fonts could be 11 if you're using Arial or Calibri, but Times New Roman definitely 12. Any citation format, I'm not too particular about that. And I forgot this in the first assignment. No? It should be only 1-inch margins. No? Can't be less. Yung iba kasi, they try to squeeze in more text, no, by doing narrow margins. 1-inch margins at the minimum. You can, if you want 1.25, that's up to you, but no less than 1 inch. So for more details, read the instructions at the end of Module 4. And I'm trying to do something different, no? Since it's good that we have a semestral format, more breathing space, more time that can be allotted for things like consultations. So I'm planning group consultations, no? In the last 2 sessions before the deadline. No? So November 10, maybe we'll have 2 groups, and November 17, 4 groups. No? 30 minutes each or less. No? So stay tuned. But of course, if your group doesn't want to consult with me, or you don't have a lot of questions for homework number 2, okay lang. You just tell me, sir, we don't think we need a consultation. So that's up to you as well. So I don't want to force you guys to do consultations. Not at all. Pero if, for example, you have questions and you want to, let's say, sir, can you comment on our emerging direction draft? We can do that during the consultation. So it's basically free. But of course, don't expect me to outright give you answers. I can probably give you some clues, or try to correct the path you're on. So stay tuned. I'm still thinking of the dynamics for that. But again, let me know if your group does not want to do consultation. All right. Any questions so far? If I don't see questions, no, I'll just continue.
On so far.
Okay, good. All right. So module 4 is composed again of 4 things, no? Subtopics. No? We'll do it week by week. No? So today, we'll cover agriculture and agrarian reform. It's the longest one. No? Succeeding sessions is going to be 1 per week. No? Public finance, and then population and demography, then MSME development. So it gets shorter as you finish one topic. As you move to the next topic, it becomes shorter. The last one, MSME, that's very, very, very short. Definitely. So today it's agriculture and agrarian reform. And I hope some of you have started this on Canvas now. I saw at least one person already who was able to answer the discussion board in module 4. So in agriculture, so which is good. So I'm assuming that some of you have started at the very least. So let's jump to agriculture. No? Now we're shifting from macro paradigms, no, from module 3. Now we're tackling specific sectors. So we're starting with agriculture. And later on, at the end of this class, agrarian reform. So the basic outline is, well, first is why are we studying agriculture? No? Aside from CHED mandating this, no? It's actually required, no? As a basic topic, no? For all college level classes. So you should have a course. Dati kasi agriculture was folded into basic economics, but I found out no basic economics is no longer required. So SOCSI 13 is sort of the quasi basic economics, no? Plus. No? So I'll also go through some of the long-standing perennial issues when we're talking about agriculture, the development challenges there in the sector, government's thrusts. No, it's always good to revisit what the government is trying to do. And then I have some selected important topics. No? One is food security versus self-sufficiency. Second is agribusiness value chains. Okay. All right. The slide on the chart on the left might be familiar to you. No? We covered this when we were doing C. Lewis, I think, the structural approach. So why is agriculture important? That's the first question we're trying to answer. And basically, I'm following the flow of Canvas, of what you have in Canvas. So if you look at this, this chart is basically the share of the sector. No? Again, if you divide the economy into the 3 major sectors, agriculture, industry, and services. As we have learned last time, no, and in Canvas, no, agriculture accounts for the lowest share, no, pinakamaliit. So, and it has been going down. You would think na it went up 2020. Technically, it did, pero share kasi yan. Technically, it did, but it was a weird year. If you remember, that was the year of the pandemic. So, this is sort of an outlier. Kasi nga, majority of the businesses, except agriculture, actually had to shut down, especially in major cities. So, kaya tumaas yung share of agriculture. So the point here is agriculture is still important because it still accounts for roughly a tenth, no, 10% of the economy, which is still large. In percentage terms, it's quite low, pero it's still something. But if you look to the chart on the right, it shows it actually emphasizes the importance of agriculture, even though it contributes just a little, no, to the overall economy. Many more people rely on it for employment. It's much the significance is much larger compared to its share of GDP. No? If you look at this, dati one third, no, a third of everyone, no, relied on agriculture. Now it's down to let's say a quarter, 1 out of 4. But that's still something. 25% roughly of people rely on agriculture for employment. So it's still important because a lot of people rely on it. It's actually larger, no, than industry. Kasi nga, we don't have a deep, as we studied last time, we don't have a deep, broad manufacturing slash industrial sector to speak of. So it's very important because it's a significant source of employment, and it also contributes at least 10% of economic output. And speaking of poverty, no, agriculture is synonymous to the rural side, the countryside. Poverty is a rural phenomenon. Another reason why agriculture is important is because majority of the poor in the Philippines actually reside in the rural areas. So improving agriculture is important to improve the lot of the poor. The numbers you see are actually in thousands. So for example, 2018 tayo, that's the urban, ito share to, no? The share, the number of poor people in the urban areas are roughly 5 million Filipinos in 2018. Remember, official income-based poverty measures are estimated every 3 years. Wala pa in 2021. We're still in 2021. So in 2018, no, the number of poor Filipinos in the urban areas were roughly 5 million. Pero in the rural areas, it's double or more than double. It's 12.6 million Filipinos. So almost 3. No, it's been that the same trend pretty much since before, no, since decades ago. No. 3 out of 4, almost 3 out of 4, 75% is 3 out of 4 of the poor in the Philippines reside in the rural areas. So it is important. No? And again, and they compose the bulk of this employee. So that's another important thing. No? And it's on Canvas. I'm not covering it tonight, no. But also, if you go the PSA, PSA does the FIES, all of the APIS, all of these different surveys and censuses. Every 3 years also, they try to estimate poverty incidence by sector. No? In the Philippines, there's a law that identified the most disadvantaged sectors. So there are 12. No? So that would include fisher folk, farmers, indigenous peoples, urban poor, senior citizens, women, children, formal labor, migrant workers, cooperatives, etc., etc. They found that if you compare poverty incidence across the different sectors, poverty incidence is highest among farmers and fisherfolk. So really, poverty is actually more or less synonymous with agriculture and the countryside. So it's really important. If you really want to help the country improve, no, aside from manufacturing, you should also find a way to improve agriculture because many people rely on that. And many people who are relying on that are actually poor. Another reason why agriculture is important, no, it is actually the brightest. No, if you compare again the 3 sectors, the brightest, it's a bright spot now. It actually almost, no, I don't know if you're following the news, no. since early this year, no, we've been the livestock sector, no, pork, no, hog sector, no, it's been suffering from its own pandemic, no, animal pandemic. It's called the African swine flu. No? Actually, it's funny nga eh. They're actually saying ivermectin works for that kind, no, for that animal pandemic, no, not COVID. No? So if it weren't for that animal pandemic, no, agriculture could have probably expanded or could have grown in 2020. No? Pero yun nga, tinan nyo, crops actually expanded by huge margins. No? Livestock, ito talaga, this brought the whole sector down. So, but still, among the three major sectors, it was the best performer. Mas less yung negative niya. So, while agriculture plus forestry contracted, crops and fisheries grew. No? It was the smallest contraction among key sectors. But yun nga, no, the livestock sector kept, and we'll talk about the pork issue later, no, as a good example of food security versus self-sufficiency. So it's the bright spot now. No? And it's really the bright spot because of the pandemic. Diba, the pandemic, diba, there are, you should, if you want to go out, you continue working, you should follow basic health protocols. And one of the basic health protocols is social distancing. And syempre, among the three sectors, industry, services, agriculture, by default, there's social distancing in the farms. No? So ito, I really like this chart here, no? This was done by Dr. Aldaba, who was just the previous SOCSI dean, no, Social Sciences, Loyola School of Social Sciences dean. No, he stepped down, I think, before during the last semester, the end of the last semester. He did this calculation. No? It not only was it the almost gainer in 2020, but it's a bright spot now because it is a growth potential in the country given its social distancing implications. Imperatives pala, sorry, of COVID-19. So look at this chart. I'll explain this chart to you. And it's a really nice insight. No? Why is it a bright spot? And even before the pandemic, they were saying if you improve agriculture, it can really be a growth driver. Let's examine this slide. By itself, just focus on the first row. No? By itself, again, kanina nga, the share of agriculture to GDP, no? There are some estimation errors, no? Kaya hindi masyadong tugma with this one. But it's pretty close. No? 8.8 and 7.7, pretty close. Again, not just this one, no, not super big, no, in terms of contribution to economic output to GDP, but there's 10 million Filipinos employed. That's a lot. The infection risk is low, and obviously, if you in the rural areas, testing is not really required before one can farm. And they were also calculating the forward and backward linkages. Now, I'm not sure if you already learned this, what do you call this, concept, no, in your management classes. No? Backward and forward linkages, ano lang naman yan eh. If you're a business or if you're a sector, no, backward is your suppliers. No? Kasi of course, if you're engaged in agriculture, there's also an industry that you rely on for inputs. No? So yung seeds, yung farm implements, yung tractors, yung kalabaw, whatever, feeds for the animals, etc. So there are backward linkages, meaning there are linkages to industries that supply. Forward naman is the industries that you supply to. So that's the concept of backward, where you get your supply, and backward where you get your supply, forward where you sell to. So meron siyang multiplier effect kasi meron din siyang contribution to the other backward and forward sectors that you rely on for supply or for your markets. So you'd think no, it's only small, no. Pero again, going back to the concept of multiplier or the linkages, agriculture is not confined to one subsector alone, no. It also affects different subsectors. It affects food manufacturing. How can you manufacture food without agriculture? That's kind of stupid kasi you can't manufacture food that is not grown in the agriculture subsector. Diba? So it's not only this. So you can actually add, no, in terms of its actual contribution and its linkages. Now you can add these two. It's almost 16% and more than almost 11 million, actually 11 million plus Filipinos employed. So it's not only, kasi itong agriculture and fishery, that's basically just the crop or the animal that you sell. Walang manufacturing. Pero if you add these two, no, all the more. You can see that, it has a much larger contribution. But it doesn't stop there, no? Logistics, no? If you transport your food products, no, whether that's processed or not, no? So it also can contribute to this subsector and supermarkets as well and the restaurants. So ang dami niyang linkages. So the real, if you really compute it, direct, indirect, you'd probably go more than 20%, and then employment could be 15, 20 million Filipinos. So it has that potential because of its connections. But again, going back to our lessons in Module 3, it's really important if you can really industrialize agriculture. And we have a lesson later on what we call value chains. Kasi not only does it have more interlinkages with other subsectors, no, it actually can fetch higher incomes for whoever's involved in food manufacturing. Mamaya, we'll cover that when we go through value chains. So this is a pretty neat table. Oh, Gab, go ahead. Sorry.
Sir, I just wanted to clarify lang because I think I read in an article before that the Philippines kind of opened up the foreign investment for like the rights to fish in our oceans. So I just wanted to know lang, would that be considered like part of our fishing industry? Like, will that contribute to the GDP or?
If
Yeah.
they're just fishing or are they processing?
I think sir, parang they gave the rights to like Japanese companies to fish in our waters, but I'm not
But that's
entirely.
still counted because that economy, because they will sell it eventually. Whether that's for export or for imports, that's counted here because the economic activity is still, you can quantify the fish. And by the way, no, GDP pala, I forgot to clarify this. The way it's measured, no, it's by the final good, no. They don't count the intermediate good. So when it's sold, the last point at which it is sold, no, dun siya counted. So if it's exported, it's still counted here, no, or whether it's sold in domestic markets here in the Philippines. So counted siya, whether it's sold outside or not, because the economic activity happened here. Remember, gross domestic product is domestic, no? It's location specific, no? Pero kumbaga, just to distinguish again between GDP and GNP, no? The Japanese companies can count, the Japanese government will count that towards their GNP kasi it was done by a Japanese company. Pero the Japanese cannot count it towards their GDP. Tayo naman, we will count it as part of our GDP kasi it was done here, but we will not count it towards GNP kasi nationality specific yun, Japanese yun. So it's counted towards there nationally. So, pero sa GDP, yes, counted.
Okay, thanks, sir. I think that answered my question.
Okay, great. Okay, whoops. Ayan. All right. Ito, I ask you guys now, no, even though you haven't started or you haven't finished this subtopic yet in Module 4 now, just based on what you've read, what you know, in my other class, no, her parents owned rice fields, no, they were the rice trading business, so she knew firsthand. No? Ayo, what do you think are the key issues that has made agriculture the lagging sector in the country? What are the key issues? Go ahead, ZJ.
Sir, I think like the transforming of land that's supposed to be for farming, they transform it into something like a village or something like where people can live. I think.
That is actually a good point. No? I didn't cover that on Canvas, but that's a long-standing debate. No? Kasi at the same time that there's pressure to accommodate more urban folk, no, versus, yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, yes. Probably your point there is the lack of importance they place kasi they can just convert it into camellia homes, as the joke goes. Sige, that's a good point. Anyone else? Sophia.
Sir, I think for like some farmers, they found it challenging to bring their products to the market. So, I mean, like nowadays we start to see many of these businesses, they call it like, I'm not sure if it's like farm to table businesses where they're directly linking the farmers from certain areas, such as in Baguio, and then they're linking them to people that are selling them in Metro Manila.
Yeah.
So I think
Like,
that's one
you're
issue
absolutely
that has made agriculture a lagging sector.
correct. It's the lack of connectivity sometimes, or from farm to wherever they want to sell. No? During the pandemic, you saw that firsthand. No, they had to throw. No, farmers had to throw, just dump their tomatoes somewhere because they couldn't access the market. Marco and then Gabriel.
So I think one reason is that like first it's that it's hard to scale. Like you can only really make it as big as the land that it contains. Parang unlike for example like let's say Facebook or technology, it's easy to scale globally, but if it's farming and agriculture, you're restricted to the land. And then the other thing is I think productivity wise, it may be harder to get a good yield compared to other like manufacturing. Like manufacturing may have like a higher return on investment, or maybe even services may have a higher return on investment than the current productivity yield that agriculture provides. Parang if you look at the um the reward based on the capital investment, it might not be enough. That's what I think.
That's a good point. And land is a finite resource. And then when we cover the topic on agrarian reform, no, that policy actually further fragmented the lands. So it's actually harder, no? And that has led to the lower ROI, as you said, no, or of that sector. Good. Sige. And Gabriel.
Yeah, I think Marco worded it really well. But just to add to that, I feel like I think that the yield, like for the land, it's not enough to really like I feel like landowners have to consider then the opportunity costs of what kind of business they're going to set up there. So I feel like um they're going to be more attracted to maybe selling their land to developers or something, maybe because
Yeah.
farming just isn't as profitable as those other options.
Yeah. So again, it becomes like a vicious cycle, no, so to speak, no? Because it becomes, it's less ROI, no, less incentive, no. Then all the more that importance becomes low, and then it's a vicious cycle. So talaga napapabayaan. Sige. So we'll continue. No? So some of this you guys have already mentioned. No? So uh, first is, let's discuss the second one kasi some of you hit this already. No? Part of the reason why there's low ROI really is there's low modernization, low farm mechanization. Diba? As we learned in module 3, no? In sino ba? Si Rosto. And sorry, Jared and Dumar. Basically, your capital output ratio should be smaller, di ba? Should be bigger. Kasi nga, you want more modern technology to be more efficient, therefore your ROI can be bigger. Eh kaso, if you go to the countryside, it's romanticized, no? Parang kalabaw, etc. But it's not good. When you go to developed countries, it's basically mechanized and the ROI is much larger. Another is limited access to credit and insurance. No? So farmers, no, even government banks, no, they are wary to lend to farmers kasi lack of collateral, etc., etc., and they're not trusted enough, no, by the lenders. And the systemic, it's also systemic, no. There is not the support, the support ecosystem is not great. No? There's inadequate irrigation. Of course, you need water, no, for agriculture. There's also inadequacy when it comes to post-harvest facilities. No? Post-harvest facilities lang naman, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's what they say, no, roughly the produce that we get in Metro Manila, no, usually comes from, let's say, Baguio or some other rural area. No? But from the farm all the way to the supermarkets, usually mga 30-40% that's already wasted. There's a lot of spoilage, no? Whether it's transported or nabubulok lang along the way, because there's lack of post-harvest facilities, no? Yung mga, let's say, cold storage, no? To keep them chilled muna, to prevent them from spoiling, no? Lack of drying facilities, no? So ito nga, sa joke, my mother is from Pangasinan. We keep joking before when we were kids, no, going on vacation to Pangasinan. Parang, they have solar dryers kasi they're literally drying the palay on the highway. Ganon, no? So, yun nga. So, it's really lack of that. Even up to now, no? Things have been improving, but gradually. And limited research and development, no? Government, not just in this administration, but since before, no, has prioritized this less. No? In agriculture, actually, for example, ROI, no? Speaking of ROI, if you can sort of promote better methodologies, no, when it comes to farming, much better. No? Marco, you're done naman raising your hand na. No?
Sorry, sir. Sorry.
Okay, just curious. And then it's also the weak, again, going back to the support system, no, for farmers. There's also weak extension services. No? When you say extension services, it's where the farmers go to if they need technical know-how, support for whatever. The problem is in the rural areas, no, it's very dependent whether the local government has a good agriculture office or not. Kasi sometimes they have people there pero wala namang alam. And sometimes, no, wait, Ravi, I'll finish this first. And sometimes, no, the state universities and colleges, no, one of their purposes also, no, especially in the countryside, they're supposed to provide additional training or know-how also to the farmers and fisher folk. No? But it rarely happens. No? There are some, no? For example, if you go to Iloilo, there's a solid fisheries center there, no? SIFDEC. No? I'll just finish this, Ravi, no? Then I'll get to you. Another is agrarian reform issues, which we'll cover later. No? And here's an emerging problem, no? Aging farmers and fisher folk. This goes back to our point about the vicious cycle. No? It has become unattractive because of these things. No? Agriculture has not been lucrative. So the younger generation don't want to go there. No? They'd rather go to the urban areas, no, to do other things, no? Seek greener seek greener pastures in the non-green environments, so to speak. So, yun na, walang re-replace. No? Sige, Ravi, go ahead.
Sir, in what instances would farmers need access to credit?
Not, I mean, sometimes the government provides free inputs like seeds, fertilizers, etc. But it's not free all the time. So it's like any, think of farming as any kind of business. Kailangan mo ng puhunan. No? You need more fertilizers, you need to pay the irrigation, irrigation services. You need to rent a tractor or something. So you need some capital as well. Capital meaning money naman this time around for credit. So think of farming as any SME, any small business.
All right.
Did that
Thank you,
answer
sir.
your question, Ravi?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So those are the key issues, no? And it's been like this for the longest time. And now we go to, again, just like your CBMS, no? There are problems. Now, what's the solution? No? So it's also good to revisit what the government is trying to do. You might, many might be saying na itong Duterte administration, it didn't have a lot of good appointments, no, in the cabinet. No? Except, I would argue, one of the best appointees, no, that Duterte did or made, no, was Secretary Dar. No? The problem is she didn't start right off the bat. No? Duterte appointed Manny Piñol before. No? He was, I mean, I'm saying this not as an Ateneo professor or as a USAID person, as an individual. No, he was a bad. Si Piñol was a really bad DA secretary. Good thing that he was replaced by Secretary Dar. Secretary Dar has a PhD in horticulture or something. So really solid guy. He knows the technical aspects of things. And he's a thinker as well. So he has these 8 points. And I have 2 favorite secretaries, no, in this administration, Sec Lopez of DTI and Secretary Dar. Of course, Secretary Chua, Carl Chua, newly appointed NEDA secretary, is also, he's a friend actually. No? We were batchmates. No? We were not classmates. M.E. siya. I was MECO. But we knew each other from the World Bank before. Really solid guys. So there are some good appointments as well. Go ahead, Marco.
Sir, what do you think of the BSP, si Jokno?
Yes, definitely. Jokno is a, I'm not sure if he ever became the dean of UP School of Economics, but he's a solid economist. No? They were questioning his banking credentials. No? Pero, finance economics, it's intertwined. No? So Jokno is a solid economist. No? BSP also is solid, definitely. Si Jokno. But the previous one, si Nestor Espinilla, actually, whose wife was my colleague, no, at USAID. Namatay because of cancer. He was solid as well. No? He was the reason why we now have GCash, we have a very good e-payments ecosystem. But he died of cancer. That's why Duterte had to appoint someone else. Magaling. BSP naman, if you actually want to pursue a career na very technical, BSP is a good place to work in, by the way. So think of it as well. Yeah. So just going to the 8-point agenda, I'll try to breeze through. No? You can watch the video on Canvas and you can read more. I'll go through this quickly. So one is, again, modernization. No? Again, ROI, you're thinking, more bang for the buck, make it more efficient, no? And make it more attractive. No? Kasi you can't attract the young to agriculture if they see their parents out in the fields really doing hard labor. No? So mechanization is the key. No? Industrialization, really, when we talk about value chains, I think it's the next few slides. No? We need to go into more value adding activities, meaning industrialization, processing, manufacturing, rather than just farming. Transforming it into something that's more valuable and what can make farmers or agribusinesses earn more money. So just, you want to promote them, your agriculture goods abroad as well, no? Whether they're basic crops as is, no, or processed fruits. No, we've had success, no, in bananas, VCO, no, in terms of processed stuff. Coconut, some cacao, we're gaining some reputation for cacao coffee, a little bit. No? And the good thing with promoting exports is not just to earn more money, no, for our farmers here. No, it's actually incentivizing more people to engage in agriculture and to shift into higher value crops. Later, again, I'll discuss what that means. And it sort of forces farmers and agribusinesses to level up in terms of standards. Kasi dati parang, and for the longest time, our agriculture, our produce have been known to be parang inconsistent in terms of quality. But if you're selling abroad, it has to be, you level up your quality. So it also forces you in a good way, no, to level up your quality. And then again, land is finite, and the problem with agrarian reform is it fragmented lands. Now there's an effort now to sort of try and consolidate again small and medium-sized farms. Kasi we'll talk about economies of scale later on. The concept of economies of scale, especially for some crops, is to be profitable or more profitable, you need larger land sizes. Especially if you have huge markets, no? Domestic or foreign markets. Infra, as someone pointed out earlier, connecting the farms to markets, that's still an important agenda. And they're trying their best to do that. No? Higher budget, definitely. I work with a former UP professor as well in one of my projects, as Dr. Gilbert Lianto. Used to be a Deputy Director General of NEDA, meaning a USEC under NEDA, under Secretary. He was complaining, the budget for agriculture is not just that it's tiny relative to the other sectors. No? If you examine the budget going to agriculture, the bulk of it goes to just two crops, rice and corn. And the problem with that is rice and corn were not competitive even abroad. That's why we need to import, especially for the rice tariffication group. So much focus on rice, pero we're not even competitive when it comes to rice production. So it's it's a larger budget and the right kind of budget going to the right sectors. Obviously, you need some reforms, in the sector, and that's why I'm assigning two laws. You critique it, maybe you can identify some needed reforms that can help the agriculture sector as a whole. And then number 8 is not really a paradigm, but more, I think, for Secretary Dar, that's a note to themselves. And this is my main criticism here. I'm not a big fan of this, of number 8. Kasi, well, it's true naman. Kasi before, there were no master plans for the various crops in agriculture. So it's also right that, the DA would come up with roadmaps for, let's say, corn, roadmaps for rice, for higher value crops like coffee, cacao. But the problem is, in the Philippines, usually since before, the Philippine government is really, really good when it comes to planning or doing roadmaps. The problem is usually the execution. You Google, roadmap plans, Philippine government, ang gagaling. But sometimes for lack of budget or for lack of capacity, it's really the execution where we fail. So road mapping, other countries, they copy our laws, they copy our policies, but they execute. Tayo naman, magaling lang sa drawing, but not the execution. So that's been a problem for us. one important topic when we talk about agriculture is the concept of food security versus self-sufficiency. Even if you haven't studied this on Canvas yet, what's the difference? Can you guys tell me what's the difference? What do you think? Or take a wild guess. Go ahead, Gabriel.
So I think food security is just meeting the demand for food in the country, but this could be met by imported imported rice or other agricultural products. And for self-sufficiency means that the country can produce a sufficient amount of food to meet the country's needs.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's the difference between food security and self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency, we don't need to import. We produce everything that we need, especially in the agriculture space. Food security, on the other hand, self-sufficiency is we don't need to import. No? And sometimes self-sufficiency is even if it's expensive and imported stuff, you're still sufficient. It doesn't matter whether the prices are high or low. Food security naman is you're meeting demand or consumption needs of the citizens of the country, through a combination of domestic production as well as imports. And there are 4 pillars here from the UN. It's availability, it's there, whether that's imported or domestically produced. There's access, it's not enough that it's there, but people need to be able to conveniently access it. It's connected to good infrastructure. There's logistics to get the produce from A to B, etc., etc. And it's affordable. And people are actually consuming it. And another is it's not seasonal, papatsi-patsi lang or paminsan-minsan, but supply is constant. There's usually a tension between self-sufficiency and food security when it comes to price. And I'll stop here. Just one point about the rice tariffication law. This became evident, and I don't want to provide a lot of information because it's part of the assignment of the rice tariffication group. That was really the tension. Do we aspire for? Because sometimes it's very romanticized. There we can produce our own needs. Pero hindi. Sometimes if you're producing pero it's more expensive pala than just importing stuff, you're penalizing the consumers. Yun nga yung debate sa rice tariffication. All Filipinos, 99% are rice eaters, extra rice pa nga, or only rice. Pero you're protecting naman a smaller share, although poorer share of the population. So do you open up? Do you not? So that's the debate around rice self-sufficiency. So it's usually this, the tension between self-sufficiency is it cheaper to import or produce? Kasi the basic point sana is if it's cheaper from a global trading perspective, if it's cheaper for the consumers for you to import, mas maganda yun. Look at the Singapore model. Since they have scarcity of land, most of the agriculture produce they import. But they are a developed country, no one is complaining naman na dapat puro dito kasi it's romanticizing. Of course, tama naman yung point about kawawa yung farmers naman if they end up losing money. So there's always that tension. There's 2 sides to the story. So instead of me discussing the rice tariffication, I'll discuss a similar thing that the government is grappling with. Just to illustrate the tension between food security, balancing imports and domestic production versus self-sufficiency. So I don't know if you guys are involved in buying food for your family, going to the supermarket or the market with your parents, your mom, your dad, or you yourselves do it. No? So you probably noticed, no, in the last few months, no, early this year, no, the prices of pork really were super high. Even up to now, they're still high. And that's because local production uh, was really significantly reduced because of the pandemic, the animal pandemic, yung African swine flu. Um, so what happened was it put pressure kasi again, most Filipinos are pork eaters, no? So people were starting to complain, grabbing inflation of pork, and that affects the entire inflation. It of course affects people's incomes. So it put pressure to the government to finally liberalize imports, uh, remove certain quantitative restrictions when it came to, kasi dati meron eh. Yeah, the Philippines cannot import more than X amount of ano. So now they opened it up more. No? Kasi basic law of supply and demand, more supply, you would expect the prices to go down. Diba? So that's the basic theory. No? Pero of course, the farmers didn't like it, the local farmers, kasi, boy, that's competition. Diba? Of course, if you're a business and someone wants to compete with you, you don't like that, especially if you're not, hindi ka super secure. No? So just a story, no. So this I just saw this a few weeks ago, no. Because of that measure, no, at least the prices started stabilizing. So what I did was I copy pasted parts of this article, and just to show you blow by blow, I reordered the so it was super high in January, 360 kilo and 400, no, yung ano, I think Kasim and Belly, no, Liempo and Belly. Gugutom na ako. So yun nga, there were two executive orders that reduced the tariffs. No? When you reduce the tariff kasi, it means no, it's more beneficial for importers to import kasi mas mabibenta nila at a lower price here. No? So it basically liberalized pork importation. And based on the article, no, a few months after, no, the prices actually stabilized, no, from 360 to 280 and 400 to 340. That's really big. That's really big. Just imagine if a family eats a kilo per a few days or per week or per day even. No? That's big. No? And even the frozen one, no, are more. So that's the concept. No, sometimes it's a tension between affordability versus self-sufficiency. Yes, we can, no, just like the rice, no, we can produce, pero yun nga, the funny thing with rice is we have been producing, no, but number one, we're not self-sufficient. We cannot meet 100% all of our requirements. And second, our production is more expensive, no? Even if you impose taxes, tariffs kasi lang naman are taxes on imports, on imported rice from Vietnam and Thailand, in most cases, they are still cheaper than local production. So yun, may tension palagi on food security versus self-sufficiency. It's a good political agenda kasi it's very populist. No? Kasi for the farmers, pro-pork tawag. Pero sometimes you don't see that it's actually penalizing the consumers. So yeah, there's always that tension. So I urge the Rice Tariffication Law Group, the RTL Law Group, to really examine these issues. Okay, another important topic, and again, if you have questions, no, and if you want more details, all the articles are on Canvas anyway. It's the importance of scale. No? Agriculture, especially if we follow the models in the Netherlands, in the US even, no, most crops actually, if for agribusinesses or even cooperatives, if you want really to be more profitable for the farmers to earn more, larger land sizes are more productive and more cost efficient. It follows the principle of economies of scale. I have a 2-minute video on Canvas on the concept of economies of scale. This is one of my favorite concepts, and this is very important even for you guys, no? When you start to work for corporations. So ito, for example lang, just a very simple example. No? More basically, economies of scale is more bang for the buck. No? It's more efficient if sometimes you have scale. Kaya economies of scale. So for example, you bought a tractor for a 3-hectare land. Then there's also this other farmer who bought a tractor for a 10-hectare land. Mas sulit for the 10-hectare land because you're incurring sa accounting, di ba? You're incurring the same fixed cost, but your output is much higher for this kasi you're able to use the same good or same input, but it produces more, or you can maximize it. That's the economies of scale. No, if the larger, the better. No, and this is true for your purchases. No, sometimes pag wholesale, no, you buy a lot, you save in the long run. So in business, this is a very important. In agriculture, it's the same thing. Sige, Marco, go ahead.
Third question on the economies of scale lang. How come like if you look at like for example Russia and like the China after the Great Leap Forward, parang during those eras, they focused a lot on like the community farming. Like it was really scale. But then those failed. But then when you look at like what Japan and the US kind of experienced when they were booming with household farming, so it was more localized. How come they were parang they were able to succeed while the ones with like the bigger land like Russia and China parang they had famine and everything.
That's a good point, no? Well, yung Russia naman and China, well, that partly that's because of poor governance. Yung community farming that will really fail kasi nga again you need large tracts of land. The problem with the Japanese model is it's not a good example because it's heavily subsidized, artificial. No, what you think na parang many people think no, agriculture is doing well in Japan. Actually, it's not. Farmers are heavily subsidized kasi mayaman ng government. They're heavily subsidized by the government. So even if they're supposed to be, kung walang government support, the farmers will actually be in the losing end. They will lose money. Pero it's just government that's propping them up. So that's Japan. It's heavily subsidized. And there, if you take away that government support, they will lose. And US, actually, I would argue, no, and you can research this in your own time. US naman, it's really the larger land plots, no, that have been more productive. Nauso na yung farm to table, pero if you look at it, no, you go to restaurants that sort of romanticize the concept of, oh, this came from a smallholder farm, mas expensive. No? Mas expensive. No? And that's also the problem with organic now. No? Usually kasing organic, it hasn't reached scale yet, no? Konti pa lang from a global perspective. That's why it's more expensive. Hindi pa siya nakaka-reach of economies of scale. So Japan, sorry, it's a bad example. The US, actually the US proved that economies of scale is better, no, than having very small farms. Russia and China, those are usually bad examples kasi they're under communist and authoritarian regimes. So pangit talagang governance to begin with. Yeah. So of course there could be some what they call this, outliers, no? Some examples na no, it succeeded. Meron din naman. But if you kumbaga compare the likelihood of success, mas productive and mas profitable yung the ones with larger land sizes. That's why DA has now a current thrust on land consolidation. They're incentivizing cooperatives to present to sort of propose to DA, no, and DA will provide some subsidy in the form of fertilizers, farm implements, modern machinery. If they can propose some agriculture farming, let's say in 100-hectare plots or larger. So there's this current thrust kasi it's really more productive and more profitable kasi lower cost, more efficient, higher margins, di ba? As you know naman. Diba? Kasi there are two ways by which you can generate more profits. Either lower higher price, medyo imposible yun kasi nga no one will buy from you, or you lower your costs, and economies of scale will let you lower further your costs. We'll go back to this topic later, no, when we talk about agrarian reform. I think this is the last topic for agriculture, no, before we go to agrarian reform. This is very important, and this is actually this might interest most of you, no, because you guys are business management students, no? So there are three main ways, no, by which farmers can realize higher incomes, no, and make the sector more productive. It's number two. Industrialization is basically converting produce into something worth more with more value. So the first is, I'll go to the value chains next, but the first way is just shifting your crops. Kasi yun nga, the problem is the government for the longest time focused on rice and corn. So many were incentivized to go into rice and corn, parang comfort zone na nila. So they are now no longer toying with the idea of shifting crops. Pero there's this huge promotion by DA that no, actually you can earn more, no? If you go to, let's say, mangoes, calamansi, spices, etc., onion, garlic, and then cash crops that are for export as well, mangoes, coconut, coffee, cacao. So you shift, no? Of course, not all crops are suitable for all kinds of soil types, no? Pero so you try to choose what can be suitable for your existing one. So you shift. Kasi mas mataas ang kita, the margins are higher for, let's say, coffee, cacao, or mangoes than rice. The second is you participate in what we call value chains. Now, this is a very, very important concept. And most of the donors, no, USAID, World Bank, if they have an agriculture project, the key intervention really is all about value chains. So let me explain the concept of value chains. And there are more articles and videos on Canvas, but let me explain it now. Itong input companies, just don't mind that for now. Let's start with the farmers here. So the farmers, no, let's take the example of cacao. So cacao is already a high value crop, which is good. So I want to earn more. So when we talk about value chains, it's a chain. So a chain is step by step. What happens is the farmer sells the cacao to traders, trading and processing companies. And the trading and processing companies don't just buy it and sell it right away. No, they convert it into something else. They process the cacao. So for example, the farmers sell not sure what it is. No, they sell the wet beet. The traders then buy that. Then the traders convert it into, I think they call it fermented cacao bean. And then some of them convert it into raw tablea type cacao. So it's processed into something else. So it changed, no, the product changed. There was value. It was transformed into something else. So that's one. And then from the fermented cacao and let's say the raw cacao tablea type things. Sorry, I'm not a cacao expert. They now sell it to food companies. Let's say yung honey or chocolate or whatever, Ricoh or Hershey's. They now sell them the raw cacao, fermented whatever. And these food companies, again, further transforms the already transformed good, no, into chocolate bars. And then finally, they sell it to retailers, supermarkets, and then the consumer. So value chain, and I will distinguish this from supply chain later on. The value is it the good or the commodity is transformed as it goes to the next stage. So the cacao was transformed into something more processed, whether that's the fermented cacao bean or the raw tablea, etc., for baking or cooking. And then it was further transformed into a chocolate bar by the food companies. The basic concept of value chain is that it gets transformed to another thing at each step, at each major step. Kaya nga value chain because there's value that's added as they move from one chain to the next chain. Kasi in terms of income and profit, no, mas mabenta if you sell processed cacao versus just the raw cacao. Mas mabenta. Incomes are higher. Mas mabenta, again, also is the chocolate bar than the raw cacao tablea. So, ganun yun. That's the concept. No? So, ito, for example lang, no? This was a chart from Oxfam. It's basically, they tried to estimate the share, the income share of the various stakeholders participating in the cacao value chain. So imagine there's a chocolate bar. The total price of the chocolate bar, only 3% goes to the farmers. Kasi nga, they just sell the raw bean. Walang value added. The processors, they get more. Manufacturing, they get even more. And syempre, supermarkets naman, sometimes they have their margins. So imagine, that's just to put it into perspective. No? The more processed it is, usually the larger the value and the larger the income is. So if you want to earn more money as a farmer or as an agribusiness or as a cooperative, you try to engage in the value chain. Well, two ways, no? You can participate in the value chain as this, just selling the basic crop, walang value added, if it is a high value crop. But always the recommendation is if you can, of course not as individual farmers, pero as let's say entities like cooperatives, if you can engage in value addition interventions, much better because it will fetch you higher incomes, either here or even here. So yeah, that's the basic concept of value chains. It's better, well, two things. So either you shift to a higher value crop or you engage in value chains. And there's a third one. There's a third one. You've probably heard of the saying, build it and they will come. In agriculture, it's not true. In agriculture, the analogy for agriculture is plant it and they will buy. No, even if it's a high value crop, it doesn't mean people will automatically buy. The third important thing to remember when it comes to agriculture is make sure there's a buyer. Make sure there's a market. That's been the major failure of past government and even donor projects. Oh, you plant this, you plant that, no, may bibili. But they forget to identify who's actually going to buy. Diba? Parang, oh, ikaw, sige, most likely you'll be able to trade it to some trade and eventually to food companies. The problem is if you don't identify, you don't a glut of adlay in Bukidnon. Kasi before, no, they were encouraging farmers in Bukidnon, you plant adlay kasi that's the next superfood. Magiging uso yan. Healthy options is actually already. But they forgot, as part of their intervention, to identify sino ba talagang bibili. Who's this? They stopped here. What ended up happening was wala masyadong they ended up, they didn't know what to do, how to dispose or sell. So the important thing is it doesn't matter if it's not automatic that you shift to high value crops. Maybe billion. No, make sure that there's a market. And remember this when you start doing your own businesses in your fourth year or beyond, when you actually start the real business after college, you will be asked to do a market study. And part of it really is who's going to buy? Are you sure it's not a saturated market? Are you sure that there's a buyer? So that is a very important if you want to to do something to improve agriculture. It's not just a matter of convincing them to shift to high value crops. Make sure there's a market. And I really admire the companies like Auro. No? They have like that good concept. No? They help farmers, and at the end, they will buy. So there's an assured market for the farmers. So make sure there is a market. So this is, I think, this is the last. Yes, this is the last topic in agriculture. The next topic is agrarian reform. Just wanted to shift. Just let me know if you have questions. Sorry, I failed to distinguish value chains from supply chains. Supply chains lang naman, well, value chains have supply chains. Supply chains lang naman is how you get the good from point A to B. It's not necessary that the commodity will get transformed. It only becomes a value chain when the commodity gets transformed. Supply chain lang naman is how do you supply from point A to B to C to etc. etc. Yun lang. Just for additional information. All right, so let's shift gears now. No? And this is a short topic lang naman. But the readings are long. And I will summarize it for you guys. Even if most of you haven't covered this yet. So who can tell me lang, if you know this or you've probably gone through Canvas, the module in Canvas, what is CARP? What is the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program all about? And what's CARPer, the successor program? Anyone? Wala. Okay lang, no worries. So the CARP was a program, and it's still a program. I think implemented, enacted since the late 80s. Basically, kasi before there were a lot of haciendas, lots of landlords owning large pieces of land. No? Before CARP, they tried doing land reform. The basic premise of land reform is equity. The poor, the farmers, kawawa naman. They're just tenants. They toil the land, but they don't own the land. Tenants lang sila. So for equity's sake, they started piloting. What if we distribute the large pieces of land, give it to the farmers? So we divide up the large pieces of land. Of course, they will compensate the owner and then give the people 3 to 5 hectares. The farmers each. Or in some cases, communities. You're a large cooperative or a community. I'll give you 100 hectares, but I'll give you a community title. Ito kasi 3 to 5 hectares, what do you call this? Individual titles. So before CARP, that was the case, few pilots. But then they decided, sige, we want to increase our equity, equitable distribution of land or property to the people. Let's cover all lands. So wala nang exempted. It's not just rice and corn, but all lands that are suited for whatever crop. So yun na. So what became the norm? There were some exceptions. Some large companies were able to get exemptions. Pero in most cases, land ownership, the average was 3 to 5 hectares lang. And it's been implemented since that time. It hasn't ended yet. Government is still, kasi there are some challenges, logistical challenges, some court issues as well. And then a few years ago, it was supposed to end kasi may shelf life lang yung CARP. It was supposed to end, but Congress decided to extend it. So they wrote a law called CARPers, basically CARP extension with reforms. But it's practically the same thing. It's basically saying government will continue this until it has met its targets. Kasi may target naman of private lands, public lands to be distributed. So that's CARP for you. So you probably haven't gone through this. So ako na lang, I'll supply this to you. No problem. So what are the positives and the negatives when it came to CARP, agrarian reform? In some studies, the authors found that agrarian reform beneficiaries had lower poverty rates than their counterparts that were not agrarian reform beneficiaries, farmers, both farmers. So good, di ba? And the poor have an asset, no? Di ba, sabi nga natin, one way to avoid chronic or transient poverty is to have assets, whether that's cash or property. So at least you have an asset. And the poor, now part of the law was the poor, they're provided with support services. So irrigation, subsidized seeds, fertilizer, etc., etc. And in some cases, yung DAR, Department of Agrarian Reform, also had projects farm to market roads, etc., etc. So there were some positives. So you have land na nga, and you're provided with some support. Now, going to the negatives, the first negative is some economists are challenging this research. The research is done by some of these authors. Parang there were methodological issues. So sinasabi ng iba, it's not settled actually. So I'm not sure. I'm torn actually when it comes to the actual statistics empirical basis. But I wanted to focus on the other negatives. Yes, the poor have an asset, pero the problem with CARP is they gave land. The problem with giving the land, it came with many restrictions. One, actually, it's not for free. Of course, it's not. That's not necessarily a problem, but it's not free, and the farmers who received them were supposed to pay it in installments for a long period of time. The problem is you cannot do pretty much anything with it, apart from you tilling the land. You can't lease it for 10 years, since you get it, and until your loan has been fully paid. Some of them cannot pay the loan easily, so they incur penalties, interest, etc. And if farmers need to borrow money from the banks, the losses, the CARP lands, the agrarian reform lands, cannot be used as collateral. So the problem is, if you're not entrepreneurial enough, you can't maximize your 3 to 5 hectares of land, you can actually be a landed poor. Diba? You have an asset, but you wanted to make money out of it by leasing it or using it as collateral. You cannot. And it becomes a problem. Kasi because of the constraints. Kung wala sana constraints, it could have been better. So it actually has led to a lot of farmers indebted. Because first, some kasi are just used to subsistence farming, or they use a small plot of land. The rest, they don't use it at all. Sayang lang, because they can't lease it, and they can't even engage in other types of entrepreneurial activities kasi they can't even use it as collateral. So, or if they want to maximize it but they don't have the means, they can't go to the bank because you can't use it as collateral. So, diba, ang daming constraints and problems. Sorry, this might be a bit foreign to you now because you haven't covered it on Canvas. Pero these are just the major highlights. And going back to our lesson on economies of scale, and this has been empirically proven. This is one of the major reasons for the loss in agriculture productivity. it fragmented lands. Agriculture really, to be more productive, lends itself to large contiguous lands. So yun, less investment, no, less productivity, less incentive for investors to invest, agribusinesses. It really goes against the economies of scale. So kaya nga yung vicious cycle, because fragmented lands, less investors, then it's all about subsistence farming again. Sayang. And they found out, no, in some agrarian reform, like rural areas that had a lot of lands covered under carp, no, there was capital flight. No? You would expect, no, mas maraming banks going there. Hindi. The banks actually refused to lend money, or in some cases, they left. Kasi yun nga, they didn't trust the farmers can borrow kasi nga they can't use their land as collateral. So instead of banks flourishing, some actually, or many left. Ayoko dito kasi there's no money to be made. It's called capital flight. If you read the paper of who's this, Dr. Fabella, Raul Fabella. And another issue with agrarian reform, sometimes government kasi it's all about numbers, no? Yayabang sa numbers, sa SONA, even before, no? Sometimes the quality of land that they gave to the farmers, no, were of poor quality. Kumbaga, sige na lang kahit anong klaseng land na lang so that we can bump up the accomplishments. And the last issue is, again, the problem is there were two modalities. No? In some cases, no, the lands were given to individual families, so ARB, Agrarian Reform Beneficiaries. So 3 to 5 hectares, isa lang titulo to a person or to that family. In another modality, it went to communities. No? Oh, you're a large community there. Para hindi mag-away-away, then I'll give you 50 hectares. 10 families will have one title, common title. The problem is, for communities, if they don't, if they don't agree on what to do, or for example, I want to do something with my plot of land, they don't want it. What do? I just have to go with the group. Diba? So it doesn't give me flexibility. Diba? So problema rin yun. So for example, tapos na to, no? And I want, siguro let's lease it na lang to an agribusiness and the rest don't want it. I can't, it doesn't give me flexibility. The community titles. So this is a preview, no, of what you would learn on Canvas, no? And I'm assuming most of you haven't covered this. No? So this is just a useful summary when you go through it. Maybe you might not be fully understanding what I've tried to explain. So this is very important. If I were to summarize, what then should we do? What should the government do for carp? Number one, they should just end carp after carper is done. Huwag na extend. Just distribute all the lands, finish it, sige, tapusin. Okay lang, tapusin na. But they should, most economists, no, and this is not a consensus, by the way, of all development practitioners. No? Pero this is, for me, I agree with this emerging proposal, and it hasn't been done yet, no? Is you target this. You target the constraints. Kasi nga, you're giving the poor an asset, pero tali yung kamay nila. Give them the flexibility. It's all about flexibility. If they're not entrepreneurial, then don't force them to be entrepreneurs. Maybe they can lease it, they can be a landlord to lease it to an agribusiness company that can actually fully maximize it. So you condone the debt. You remove this problem, this issue. You forgive the debt. No? The Bayanihan one had partial condonation of the penalties, but not the principal. So parang sinasabi ng economists like the Foundation for Economic Freedom, bitin. You should have just, kasi in any way, they computed the total value of all loans owed by agrarian farm beneficiaries. It's tiny compared to other to the subsidies, no, that people that the government incurs. Plus, land bank has to go through all the trouble of chasing after farmers. So they're incurring operation. The government is incurring operational costs, real costs, no, just chasing for crumbs, no, in the overall scheme of things. So they're saying just forgive the debt, remove these constraints. It can now be used as collateral. Okay na. It gives you flexibility. If you want to keep tilling your land, go ahead. But if you want to lease it, so it's a win-win. It's not forcing you to lease it, pero it gives you that flexibility. So I totally agree with this path forward. I'm just not sure why Congress hasn't, or the national government hasn't done this yet. But this is one of, and I totally agree with this, one of the way forwards for CARP. The second is, again, going back to flexibility. Yun nga, the problem sometimes with community titles, no, is it doesn't give flexibility to individual families. Kasi it's one common title. No? There's now a project funded by the World Bank. It's a loan. It's now trying to parcelize. No? I don't know if there's even a word called parcelize, but it's trying to split. It's a cool acronym. It's split. It's trying to split the lands into individual titles to give each agrarian reform beneficiary flexibility. So it's all about flexibility, removing the constraints. So that in itself can actually improve the entire agrarian reform sector. So that's a summary / introduction of CARP. And I urge you to keep reading, keep viewing the articles and the videos on Canvas for more details and to understand better what I tried to say. All right, any questions? So much information overload. All right, if you have any questions lang, again, feel free to email me. Yun lang. Don't hesitate. And again, my consultation hours. Yes, sir, Medj info overload. Yeah. But if you take it slowly on Canvas, then yes, you will learn more. You will understand. Okay. Everyone, have a good dinner. Have a good evening. See you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.